There are mornings when the world feels heavy before the sun even rises. You wake up and hear the hum of life cars, rushing footsteps, echoing hearts beating to the same restless rhythm. And beneath it all, there's that quiet ache we all know too well, the ache of wanting. Wanting things to stay, wanting people to understand, wanting life to unfold exactly as we imagine. But the more we grasp, the more it all slips away, like water trying to be held in our hands. I used to live like that. I thought peace would come if I could control my days, my plans, my emotions. But control is a fragile illusion. The tighter I held, the more I broke. One day, I realized I had built a prison out of expectations, and I was the only one locked inside. That was the day I found the river. Or maybe it found me. It didn't speak with words, but its language was older than sound. I sat beside it at dusk as the sky bled gold into violet, and I could feel it whisper through the wind. Nothing stays still, and that is why life remains alive. The river didn't cling to its waves. It didn't try to hold the light. It simply flowed endlessly, gracefully, becoming part of everything it touched. That night, I understood something the Buddha once said: to hold on is to suffer, to let go is to live. Letting go isn't leaving life. It's learning to move with it. To let go is to surrender the illusion of control. It doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting the rhythm of things beyond your reach. Imagine standing in a stream, the water pressing against your legs. The more you resist, the heavier it feels. But if you soften, if you yield, the current carries you effortlessly forward. What once felt like struggle becomes support. We spend our lives trying to make things certain. We cling to jobs, to people, to memories, thinking that permanence will save us. But permanence is a myth, and the tighter we grip, the faster things fade. The river teaches the opposite, that real life is movement. Change is not loss. It's continuity disguised as transformation. Every drop that leaves becomes part of something vaster, mist, rain, sea, and then returns again unbroken. I met an old man once who lived alone by a mountain stream. His hands were rough from tending the earth, his smile weathered but kind. I asked him if he ever felt lonely. He chuckled softly. "I used to," he said. "I wanted to keep everything land, family time. But one year the stream flooded and washed away half my crops. I thought I'd lost everything. But when the water receded, the soil was richer than before. Life doesn't take sun. It gives by taking away." That night I sat by the water and listened. The sound wasn't just sound. It was a teaching, reminding me that I didn't need to hold what was never mine to keep. Control, I learned, is born from fear. Fear that without our grip, we'll be lost. We mistake control for power, but it's just resistance in disguise. We draw maps for a universe that doesn't need our directions. We plan, we predict, and then life arrives like a sudden tide and washes the plans clean. Letting go doesn't mean indifference. It means giving your best effort, then setting the results free. You plant seeds, but you can't command the rain. You steer the boat, but you can't order the wind. There's an old Zen saying, "I love, let go, or be dragged." The world moves whether we approve or not. Resistance only deepens the pain. Sometimes we think we're holding something, but in truth, it's holding us. The story, the attachment, the expectation, it grips us tighter than we grip it. The moment we open our hand, freedom rushes in. Imagine holding a stone in your fist for hours. It begins to hurt. When you open your palm, you realize the pain was never from the stone, but from the holding. Letting go isn't just about people or possessions. It's about releasing the stories we tell ourselves. I'm not enough. I must be perfect. I can't fail. These thoughts are dams built across the river of the soul. When those dams collapse through heartbreak, illness, loss, we mistake the flood for destruction. But the flood is cleansing. It's life reclaiming its natural movement. There comes a moment deep in silence when the breath and the river become one. Each inhale pulls the world and each exhale lets it go. And you realize you've never been separate from the flow, you are the flow. Even sadness becomes sacred there. Tears fall, not as weakness, but as purification. The river inside us releasing its burden, washing the shore clean again. The river doesn't fight the mountain. It curves, bends, sometimes disappears underground, only to re-emerge stronger and clearer. That is how we are meant to live, not to conquer, but to continue. There's a story about a potter whose favorite vase shattered when a flood swept through his village. The next morning, he gathered the broken pieces and pressed them into his new clay. This, he said, is how the river leaves its signature on my art. I think of that often. Maybe loss isn't the end. Maybe it's the pattern we couldn't see forming yet. The river doesn't erase, it transforms. I remember another story of a fisherman who used to curse the tides for being unpredictable. He would wait for the sea to calm before setting out, wasting countless days. One morning, an old monk told him, "If you wait for the sea to stop moving, you will never sail." That day, the fisherman learned to move with the waves, to row when they rose, to rest when they fell. He realized the sea wasn't against him, it was guiding him. And from that day on, he never fought the current again. Surrender, I've come to see, isn't weakness. It's the highest kind of strength. It takes courage to stop fighting what already is. It takes faith to say, I don't control this, but I trust it. When the Buddha spoke of non-attachment, he wasn't asking us to renounce joy. He was pointing to a joy that doesn't depend on grasping, a joy that flows like water, uncontained and alive. Picture yourself standing in the rain. You can hide under an umbrella and wish it away, or you can tilt your face up and let it touch your skin. The rain falls either way. The only choice is whether you resist or receive it. Letting go is the art of receiving life exactly as it is. One evening, I returned to the river. The moon hung low, trembling on the surface. I picked up a small stone and dropped it into the current. Ripples spread outward, soft, endless, until they vanished. And I thought, that's what happens when we let go. The surface stills, but the essence remains. The stone becomes part of the riverbed, and the river carries it to the sea. Nothing is truly lost, only transformed. Standing there, I understood something simple and infinite. Life doesn't belong to me, and I don't belong to life. We are the same movement, one wave rising, one falling, all part of the same eternal sea. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The river breathed, and I breathed with it. And for the first time in years, I felt light, not because I had gained something new, but because I had finally stopped resisting what was always meant to move. Maybe this is what freedom truly means, not to escape the current, but to trust it enough to flow. Maybe peace isn't in stillness, but in surrender, in the quiet courage to drift without fear. We are rivers disguised as people learning to bend, to break, to merge again with the vast ocean of being. And when I close my eyes now, I still hear it, the soft rhythm of water meeting stone, the timeless whisper of the flow. You were never meant to hold. You were meant to flow. There was a spring when I thought everything would last. The air was soft, the trees bursting into color, and the world felt endless. I remember walking through a field where wildflowers grew like fragments of a forgotten dream, each petal trembling in the wind, each one perfect in its fragility. I didn't know then that beauty and impermanence were one and the same. I thought beauty was what stayed. But the truth is, beauty is what leaves. I used to think that loss was failure, that endings meant something went wrong. But as the seasons turned, I began to notice how nature never resisted change. The flowers bloomed without fear of fading. The leaves turned gold without mourning the green. Even the sky changed its clothes every evening, burning, dimming, surrendering. Everything in nature seemed to understand something I did not, that to live is to transform, and transformation is never tragedy. It was a quiet afternoon when I first saw the truth in full bloom. A single flower had opened on my windowsill, small, white, delicate. I watched it for days. Each morning it stretched toward the sun, and each evening it folded into itself like a prayer. Then one morning, it was gone, just a few pale petals scattered on the wooden sill. I remember staring at the emptiness where it had been feeling both sadness and awe. How could something vanish and still leave behind so much peace? That's when I realized impermanence isn't the opposite of life. It is life. Everything that grows must also fade. Everything that begins must also end. But the end isn't destruction, it's continuation, just in another form. The flower that wilts feeds the soil. The soil births new seeds. The seeds become life again. Death, in truth, is only the moment the petals fall back to the earth that once held them. For so long I was afraid of change, afraid of growing older, of losing people, of watching time erase what I love. I clung to photos, to memories, to versions of myself that no longer existed. But I never noticed that while I was holding on to the past, the present was quietly slipping away like petals falling, while I was too busy counting them. One autumn morning, I walked through a forest carpeted in gold. Every leaf beneath my feet was dying, yet the world glowed brighter than ever. The sun pierced through the branches, and it hit me nothing lasts, and that's why everything shines. If the leaves never fell, the spring would never return. If the flowers never withered, the roots would never rest. Life renews itself through endings. There's something humbling about realizing that we too are seasons. We bloom, we change, we fall apart, we begin again. We are born with the same courage as a blossom, fragile yet fearless. The flower never asks for eternity. It only asks for sunlight while it lasts. I remember visiting my mother's garden after she passed away. The roses she planted were in full bloom, their scent lingering in the warm air. I knelt beside them, touched their soft edges, and felt tears rise. For a moment, I understood that she wasn't gone. She had simply changed forms. She was in the soil, in the roots, in the breath I took standing there. She had become part of the cycle that never ends. The flowers taught me that love too is impermanent, not because it disappears, but because it keeps changing shape. The love we share doesn't die when people leave. It transforms into memory, into wisdom, into gentleness that lives quietly in our gestures. When I hold a cup of tea now, or feel the sunlight on my hand, I think of her. Love doesn't stay where it was planted. It keeps blooming in unexpected seasons. Sometimes when I meditate, I imagine life as an endless garden. Some flowers bloom quickly and vanish in a day. Some take years to open, others bloom in places no one ever sees. But all are part of the same garden, all equal in their purpose, all beautiful because they end. The mind wants to preserve what moves us to frame it, name it, make it ours. But the heart knows that true beauty needs freedom. You cannot own a sunset. You cannot hold a season. You can only stand in its light for a moment and let it change you. There's a soft kind of grief that comes with understanding impermanence, not sharp like pain, but tender like memory. You begin to love things more, not less. You begin to see that every breath, every smile, every touch is unrepeatable. When you truly see that something won't last, you stop taking it for granted. You start living with reverence. One evening, I found myself watching the last light fade behind the hills. The horizon burned with gold and violet before dissolving into night, and I thought even the sun dies every day, and still it rises without complaint. Maybe that's what we're meant to do too. To rise to fall, to rise again, not seeking permanence, but presence. There was a monk I once met who cared for a field of lotuses. He told me, each flower blooms in its time, then returns to the mud. But in that mud, the seed of tomorrow already sleeps. He smiled and added, "Don't fear the falling petals. They are simply the earth, remembering how to begin again." That night, I dreamt of a garden that never stopped changing. Flowers appeared and vanished in waves, colors blending, fading, returning. I walked through it barefoot, feeling the soil pulse beneath my feet, warm, alive, breathing. And I realized that maybe the point was never to keep anything. The point was to keep walking. Impermanence is the greatest teacher I've ever had. It doesn't shout. It whispers through falling leaves and fading blooms, through the laughter that echoes and fades into silence. It reminds me that every moment is a petal, and once it falls, it will never return in the same form. That's why we must live wide awake, paying attention, loving deeply, letting go gently. Now, when I pass by a garden, I pause. I watch the petals flutter, the bees hum, the light shift through the branches, and I no longer ask, "How long will it last?" Instead, I whisper, "How beautiful that it's here at all." Maybe that's what enlightenment truly is, the quiet acceptance that all things bloom and fade, and still life is unspeakably beautiful. The flower doesn't fight the wind. The season doesn't mourn its passing. And I no longer beg the world to stay the same, because now I understand. To love something deeply is to allow it to change. To live fully is to let the petals fall, and to see beauty clearly is to know it was never meant to last. There was a morning when I woke before the world did. The air was still, the sky pale with the promise of light, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the earth were holding its breath before exhaling into a new day. I sat by the window, watching darkness fade into the slow shimmer of dawn, and I realized something simple yet profound. Every sunrise is mercy repeating itself. Gratitude began for me there, not as a word, not as a habit, but as a quiet revelation. The night doesn't fight the morning. It simply steps aside. Light doesn't conquer the dark. It reveals what was always there. I had spent so many years waiting for life to give me reasons to be grateful. But that morning, I saw the truth. Gratitude is not born from perfection. It's born from perception. The light didn't ask if I was ready. It came anyway, soft, unjudging, patient. It poured through the cracks of my doubts and touched even the corners I had long kept hidden. That's when I understood gratitude isn't something you earn. It's something you allow. For so long, I measured my days by what I lacked. I woke with lists of what was missing. The goals not reached, the people not present, the moments not yet perfect. But the dawn showed me a different kind of abundance. It whispered, "You have breath. You have sight. You have this morning." And in that whisper, everything changed. Gratitude doesn't make life flawless. It makes it luminous. It doesn't erase pain. It illuminates it, turning wounds into windows. When the sun rises, it doesn't remove the night. It transforms how we see it. Shadows remain, but they are softened by light. In the same way, gratitude doesn't demand the world to be perfect. It simply invites you to see that even imperfection glows when touched by awareness. I remember a time when I thought I had lost everything. It was winter, and my world had gone silent. Plans had fallen apart, relationships faded, and even my faith felt dim. I would sit by the window each morning, staring at the gray sky, feeling the weight of emptiness pressing on my chest. But one morning, a shaft of sunlight slipped through the clouds, landing across the table. It rested on an old cup of tea, and for some reason, that small glimmer broke me open. The tea steamed, the light shimmered on the surface, and I felt for the first time in months warmth. I don't know if it was hope or simply awareness, but in that moment I whispered, "Thank you." Not for anything specific, just for this, for the light, for the moment, for being here to see it. That single whisper became a seed, and from that seed, something began to grow inside me. Gratitude, I realized, doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you see. The light taught me that even ordinary things are miracles in disguise. The way sunlight touches dust and turns it into gold. The way morning air feels on bare skin, cool and alive. The way a stranger's smile can shift the weight of an entire day. Gratitude doesn't wait for grand gestures, it blooms in the smallest ones. I started walking early in the mornings, chasing the light. I'd watch the world awaken, the slow unfolding of petals, the quiet movement of birds, the hum of life returning. Everything shimmered with meaning when I looked with gratitude. Even the cracks in the pavement caught the sunlight and gleamed. It was as if the world had always been speaking, and I had only just learned to listen. There's a kind of holiness in those early hours, not the kind found in temples or scriptures, but in the gentle truth of existence itself. The light doesn't discriminate. It falls on all things equally, the broken and the whole, the beautiful and the forgotten. Gratitude, too, is like that. It doesn't choose. It simply shines. Sometimes I think dawn is the earth's daily forgiveness, a reminder that no matter how heavy the night was, light always returns. No failure is final. No sorrow eternal. The sun rises not because the world is perfect, but because it is possible. As the light grows stronger, everything begins to move again. The trees rustle, the birds sing, and the air fills with a kind of quiet courage. That's what gratitude feels like. Not loud, not ecstatic, but steady. Like warmth spreading through the chest, like light slowly filling a room. I used to believe gratitude required achievement, that I needed success, recognition, or happiness to deserve it. But now, I know it's the opposite. Gratitude isn't the reward. It's the beginning. It's the dawn inside the heart that precedes every new day. The world doesn't owe us a sunrise. It gives it anyway. And perhaps that's what makes light sacred, not its brightness, but its constancy. Even when clouds hide it, it's still there waiting for an opening. The same is true for grace. There was a day when I stood on a hill at dawn, watching the light spill across the valley. Everything shimmered, grass wet with dew, mountains wrapped in mist, the sky blooming in slow, silent fire. I felt small and infinite all at once. Tears came not from sadness, but from recognition, the sudden knowing that everything I needed was already here. Gratitude is not an emotion you feel when life is kind. It's a way of seeing that makes life kind. When you live in gratitude, you stop chasing meaning. You become meaning. Now, whenever I wake, I don't rush to fill the day. I just watch the light arrive. I let it touch my face, my eyes, my breath. I let it remind me that life in all its imperfections is still enough. Every morning the sun rises, and so can I. Maybe that's all gratitude really is, learning to rise with the light, no matter how many nights came before. And so, as dawn spills across the world once more, I close my eyes and whisper, "Thank you for this breath. Thank you for this sky. Thank you for this moment, this fragile golden morning where everything begins again." There was a time when I thought compassion was softness, a gentle emotion reserved for saints and dreamers. But life in its quiet persistence taught me otherwise. Compassion is not fragile. It is the ground beneath everything that grows. It is the soil that holds both seed and shadow birth and decay. Without it, nothing truly lives. I learned this truth the hard way, not through teachings or books, but through the breaking of things I loved. There were moments when I wanted to turn away from pain, mine and that of others, because it felt too heavy to bear. But the earth never turns away. It holds everything. It does not choose. It does not judge. It receives the fallen leaf and the dying branch, the storm and the seed, and turns them all into nourishment. One evening, after a long day filled with noise and disappointment, I sat outside on the cold ground. The soil was damp beneath my hands, smelling of rain and roots. I pressed my palms into it, and for the first time I realized that the earth was breathing too. Every handful of soil was alive, a silent universe of patience. And somehow, in that stillness, I felt the weight inside me begin to ease. The earth didn't fix anything. It simply accepted. And that acceptance healed me more than any answer could. That's when I understood compassion begins the moment we stop trying to fix everything and simply choose to be with it. We live in a world that fears vulnerability. We rush to comfort, to correct, to move past discomfort. But compassion doesn't rush. It sits down beside pain and listens. It says, "I see you. I will not leave." Like roots wrapping around stones underground, compassion holds without suffocating. It allows pain to exist, yet keeps it from being alone. When I was younger, I believed love meant saving people. I wanted to be the light that chased away their darkness. But now, I see true love is more like the earth. It doesn't chase anything away. It embraces the whole of it. The light, the dark, the parts that bloom, and the parts that break. Compassion doesn't demand transformation. It simply creates the space where transformation becomes possible. I think of my mother again, the way she used to tend her garden. She would kneel in the dirt, her hands deep in the soil, whispering to the roots, as if they could hear her. When I asked why she talked to them, she smiled and said, "Because everything that grows listens." Back then, I didn't understand. Now I do. Compassion is that same whisper, a language that doesn't need words. It is the silent conversation between all living things. There's a story I once heard of a forest after a wildfire. Everything above ground was gone, blackened trunks, ash covering the earth. But beneath the surface, the roots were still alive, intertwined, sharing what little moisture and minerals they could find. Over time, new shoots began to appear, fragile but determined. The forest healed not because of sunlight or rain, but because its roots refused to abandon one another. That is compassion, unseen, silent, and stronger than destruction. Sometimes I think we forget that we too are part of that same ground. We are not separate from one another. We are threads in the same soil. When one of us suffers, the earth trembles through us all. Compassion is the remembering of this connection. I have met people who radiate this quiet strength, those who have known pain deeply, and because of it, love without conditions. Their presence feels like resting on solid ground after a long journey. They don't speak much. They simply stand there, and something in you settles. That is the gift of those who have learned to root themselves in compassion. They make others feel safe enough to bloom. The older I get, the more I realize that compassion isn't about doing more. It's about being more present. It's holding the broken pieces of the world without turning away. It's looking at someone's pain or your own and saying, even this belongs. There was a day when I saw an old tree, its trunk split open by lightning. The scar ran deep, but from that very wound a new branch had begun to grow green, vibrant, reaching for the sky. Nature wastes nothing, not even pain. Every scar is an opening for new life. Maybe we are the same. Maybe our broken places are not failures, but invitations to grow roots of empathy deeper than before. Compassion is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the quiet act of holding someone's hand when there are no words left to say. It's sitting beside grief and not needing to fill the silence. It's forgiving yourself when you fall again and again. And sometimes it's just breathing with the earth, with others, with the weight of the moment, and knowing that this too is sacred. I once met a monk who said, "The ground is not afraid of what falls upon it." I never forgot that. The earth accepts everything, the rain, the ash, the tears, the footprints. It never asks why. It never closes itself. That's what I want my heart to be like, wide, dark, and fertile, ready to hold what life places within it. Now, when I walk through the forest, I listen for what lies beneath. I imagine the roots intertwining below my feet, whispering through the dark, feeding one another unseen. I think of all the lives connected by invisible threads, trees, animals, people, all drawing strength from the same earth. And I remember that compassion is not a feeling we give. It's the nature we return to. So when the world feels harsh, when people seem distant, when pain feels too wide to hold, I close my eyes and place my hand on the ground. I remember the patience of the soil, the kindness of the roots, the silence that forgives everything. And in that stillness, I hear the heartbeat of the earth, slow, steady, ancient. It tells me that to love is to hold, to root, to endure. Because in the end, we are all part of the same ground, learning to stay soft enough to heal, strong enough to hold, and humble enough to remember that everything, even sorrow, returns home to the earth. There was a time when I was afraid of the dark, not the kind that fills a room, but the kind that fills the heart. The kind where nothing feels certain, where the road disappears beneath your feet, and silence echoes louder than thought. I used to think wisdom was about knowing about answers, clarity, control. But I've learned that wisdom begins not with knowing, but with the courage to stand inside the dark and not run. The first fire I ever built was small, a fragile circle of flame flickering against the night. I remember staring into it, mesmerized by how something so gentle could push back so much darkness. And that's when I understood, the flame doesn't fight the dark. It just is. It shines because that's its nature. I've come to see that wisdom works the same way. It doesn't argue with ignorance. It doesn't conquer confusion. It simply illuminates. The moment we stop demanding certainty and instead become curious about what's true, the fire within us begins to glow. For much of my life, I mistook knowledge for light. I collected facts, read sacred texts, memorized teachings, thinking that the more I knew, the brighter I would become. But knowledge without awareness is like a candle trapped in glass, bright but suffocating. It lights nothing beyond itself. Wisdom, I've learned, is not about accumulation. It's about transformation. It's what happens when truth stops being an idea and starts being a way of seeing. It's the moment fire stops burning only for warmth and begins to illuminate the path. There are nights when I still lose my way. Doubt creeps in like cold air through cracks. Old fears whisper that the light will fade. But then I remember fire doesn't need to be large to be real. Even the smallest flame can guide you home if you stay close enough to feel its heat. Sometimes wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder or revelation. It flickers quietly, a soft knowing in the chest that says, "This is true. Keep going." You can miss it if you rush, if you demand it to prove itself. But if you listen, really listen, it's there. Steady, patient, ancient. I think of all the fires I've seen in my life. Candles at altars, lamps in temples, bonfires beneath the stars. All of them burn for the same reason, not to destroy the dark, but to remind us that we carry light inside. The Buddha once said that each of us must light our own lamp. No one can do it for us. I used to think that meant independence. Now I see it means responsibility, the sacred task of tending our own inner flame. I remember a time when I almost let mine go out. I was tired, disillusioned, convinced that the world was too cruel to stay open-hearted within it. I stopped meditating, stopped writing, stopped caring. I felt hollow, like an ember turned to ash. But then one evening, as I sat alone in the quiet, I noticed something, a faint glow still alive beneath the gray. It was weak, yes, but it was still burning. I cupped it with my breath, gently, carefully. I fed it with silence, with honesty, with the smallest acts of presence, feeling my pulse, listening to the rain, saying, "Thank you," even when I didn't mean it. And slowly, the ember became flame again. That's when I learned the most important truth of all wisdom isn't never losing your light. It's remembering how to rekindle it. The fire doesn't stay still. It changes with what it touches. Wood becomes flame, flame becomes smoke, smoke becomes sky. Everything feeds everything else. Wisdom, too, transforms. The more you share it, the brighter it burns. It's not a treasure to hoard, but a warmth to extend. I once met an old teacher who told me, "The purpose of light is not to make you special, but to make you clear." Those words stayed with me. The wiser we become, the less we need to shine above others, and the more we simply become transparent, allowing truth to pass through us. The mind, like fire, can either burn or illuminate. If you use it with greed or pride, it destroys. If you use it with awareness, it guides. The same heat that can scorch the world can also light the path to peace. There are moments when life tests the flame, when storms come, when winds rise, when everything feels like too much. And yet every time the fire finds a way to survive. It bends, it flickers, it hides behind smoke, but it does not die. The heart is the same. It can break 1,000 times and still glow in the cracks. I've come to love those cracks. They're the proof that light has touched me. They're the openings through which understanding enters. Perfection doesn't glow. Openness does. Wisdom isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming transparent enough for light to pass through. One night, I stood on a hill overlooking the city. Thousands of small lights shimmered below windows, lanterns, street lamps, each one flickering like a heartbeat, and I realized that no single flame is ever truly alone. Even in the darkest night, the world glows with 1,000 quiet fires. We just forget to look. That's what wisdom is, the remembering, the gentle seeing that every spark is sacred, that every being, no matter how lost, carries the same fire waiting to be seen. Now when I close my eyes, I no longer fear the dark. I know that the light within me is not separate from the light of the stars, or the sun, or the lamps burning in the hearts of others. It is all the same fire, the same luminous essence, the same call to awaken. And I know now that the purpose of wisdom isn't to escape the night. It's to walk through it with a flame in your hand, to see clearly, to love deeply, and to keep the fire alive, so that when others lose their way, they too may find a little light in your glow. There are moments when the world feels too loud, when thoughts rush like storms and emotions rise like waves against the heart. I used to fight those moments. I thought peace meant silence, that mindfulness meant escaping noise. But one morning, standing beneath a sky full of restless wind, I finally understood peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the space that holds it. The wind was strong that day. It moved through the trees, with a voice both wild and tender. I closed my eyes and let it touch my face. For the first time, I didn't resist it. I just breathed, in, out, again. And suddenly, something inside me began to settle. The breath and the wind became one rhythm, one pulse, one movement. I realized then that mindfulness is not about controlling the world. It's about remembering that I'm part of its breath. Every inhale is the world entering me. Every exhale is me returning to the world. Between those two, life happens endlessly, quietly, right now. For years, I lived like I was running, chasing meaning, chasing stillness, chasing something I could never quite name. I wanted to reach some perfect state where nothing hurt anymore. But the more I ran, the further away peace seemed to move. Then one day, I sat beside a lake and watched the surface tremble with wind. The water didn't try to stop the ripples. It allowed them, and still beneath it all, the depths remained calm. That's what mindfulness feels like. The surface may move, but the center is still. I began to listen to my breath as if it were an old friend I had forgotten. Inhale, presence. Exhale, release. I didn't have to fix anything. I didn't have to chase enlightenment. I only had to breathe and notice that I was alive. Sometimes the breath feels like a whisper from the universe, a reminder that I am still part of the great rhythm that moves through everything. The same wind that stirs the ocean stirs my lungs. The same air that brushes against the mountains fills my chest. Every breath connects me to everything that exists. Every bird, every leaf, every stranger walking somewhere beneath the same sky. There's a stillness that comes when you finally stop trying to become something else. When you just sit breathing, watching thoughts drift by like clouds, and realize you are not the clouds. You are the sky. I remember sitting on the floor one night, my mind spinning with all the things undone. The wind outside howled through the cracks of my window, and I thought I just wanted all to stop. But it didn't stop. It softened. I began to breathe with it slowly, rhythmically. The sound of the wind became the sound of my breath, and in that moment, nothing needed to change. The peace I'd been searching for had been breathing through me all along. Mindfulness is not escape. It is intimacy with yourself, with the world, with this fragile, fleeting now. It is feeling the wind against your skin and knowing that it has traveled across oceans to reach you. It is realizing that every breath you take is borrowed a gift from the trees, from the sea, from everything that lives. One day during meditation, I felt my breath move like the tide, gentle, ceaseless, eternal. I realized I didn't have to find calm. Calm was already there, waiting beneath the noise. I only had to listen deeply enough to feel it. That's the secret of mindfulness. It doesn't create peace. It reveals it. There's an old monk I once met who told me, "When you breathe, you pray without words." I didn't understand it then. But now, each time I inhale, I feel gratitude rise, not for anything in particular, but for the simple miracle of breathing itself. And each time I exhale, I feel the quiet surrender of trust, letting go of what I can't hold, allowing life to move as it will. I've learned that the wind never stays still, and neither do we. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. The breath remains the bridge. When I lose my way, I return to it, the gentle in the gentle out. Sometimes that's all it takes to find myself again. The world teaches us to move faster, to fill every silence, to chase every next thing. But mindfulness asks for the opposite: to slow down, to feel the wind move through a single strand of hair, to taste the air as if it were sacred to live, not in what's next, but in what's now. I remember standing on a cliff once, watching the waves crash far below. The wind pressed against me, wild and cold. I spread my arms wide and took a deep breath. For a moment, I felt weightless, like the air itself was breathing me. That's when I realized the truth. We are not separate from the breath. We are the breath. The universe inhales through us, exhales through us, and in between, we call it life. When storms come, and they always do, I no longer resist them. I breathe through them. Because breath is not escape from the storm. It's the anchor within it. The more I stay with my breath, the more I realize that mindfulness isn't about finding peace somewhere far away. It's about discovering that peace was never lost. Now each morning before the world awakens, I sit by the window and breathe with the wind. The trees sway, the curtains lift, and I remember that this very breath is a miracle. No matter how heavy yesterday was, this inhale is new. No matter how uncertain tomorrow may be, this exhale is release. Sometimes I whisper as I breathe, here, now, enough, because that's what mindfulness truly is, the art of returning again and again to the sacred simplicity of being alive. The wind moves, the breath follows, and somewhere in that rhythm, the heart remembers how to be free. There was a time when I couldn't bear to look at my own reflection. Not in mirrors, not in memories. I saw only the weight of mistakes, things I said, things I didn't, people I hurt, moments I wished I could rewrite. The past clung to me like mud after the rain, and the more I tried to wash it away, the more it spread. One evening, I found myself by a lake at dusk. The water was still so still that the sky seemed to float upon it. I knelt by the edge, watching the reflection of clouds drift across the surface, and I realized something. No matter how many ripples touched it, the water always returned to calm. It didn't hold the disturbance. It released it. That's when forgiveness began for me, not as an act, but as an understanding. The water didn't erase what had touched it. It transformed it. It reflected everything without keeping anything. I realized that's what forgiveness really is. the ability to remember without holding on. For so long, I believed forgiveness meant pretending it didn't hurt, or worse, that I had to forget. But the water taught me something softer, something truer. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the wound. It means no longer letting it define the reflection. I watched the ripples fade and saw my own face appear in the water. For the first time, I didn't look away. I saw my tired eyes, my hesitant smile, the lines that grief had carved, and beneath it all, I saw someone who was still learning how to love. That moment broke me open, not because I felt shame, but because I felt compassion. Forgiveness begins when compassion replaces judgment, when you can look at the person you once were and whisper, "You were doing your best." The lake became my teacher. Each time I visited, it showed me something new. When the wind blew, it shimmered and lost its reflection, yet the image always returned once the air grew still. That's what healing looks like, the slow clearing after storms, not the denial of them. I used to think forgiveness was a gift we gave to others. Now I know it's the freedom we give to ourselves. The moment you forgive, you stop being the keeper of your own cage. You let the water flow again. There was someone I couldn't forgive for years, someone who hurt me deeply. I carried that pain like a stone in my chest, heavy and familiar. Every time I thought of them, the old bitterness rose, poisoning the calm inside me. One day, sitting by the same lake, I picked up a small pebble and threw it into the water. Ripples spread out in widening circles until they reached the farthest edge and disappeared. I realized then that my anger was just another ripple, temporary, transient. The water didn't fight the stone. It embraced it, transformed it, and kept flowing. Could I do the same? Could I hold my pain without letting it harden me? That day, I tried something different. I closed my eyes and said, "May you be free. May I be free." I didn't mean it fully. Not yet, but even that half-hearted whisper felt like the beginning of something vast. The air felt lighter, as if a door had quietly opened inside my chest. Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It's like water finding its path through stone, patient, persistent, unstoppable. It wears down resistance, not by force, but by flow. Sometimes it's ourselves we need to forgive most for staying too long, for leaving too soon, for not knowing how to be better. I used to think self-forgiveness was selfish. But now, I see it's sacred. Because only when I forgive myself can I stop passing my pain to others. There's a quiet beauty in realizing that no one escapes mistakes. We are all rivers, carving our way through the landscape of our lives, shaping and reshaping with every turn. The stones we stumble on become part of us, smoothing our edges as we go. Forgiveness is what keeps the water clear enough to keep reflecting the sky. One night, the lake was so still that I could see the stars reflected perfectly on its surface. It was as if the heavens themselves had bent down to rest in its calm. I thought maybe that's what forgiveness does. It allows light to return where there was once only turbulence. When the heart is still enough, even sorrow can shine. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back into your life. It means letting them go from your mind. It's the act of unclenching, of releasing the hand that's been gripping pain for too long. When you forgive, you don't rewrite the story, you stop reliving it. There's a moment just before dawn when the world holds its breath. The lake mirrors both night and light at once. That's what forgiveness feels like, standing between what was and what can be, holding both with grace. I've learned that the water doesn't choose what it reflects. It simply mirrors whatever stands before it. My task, then, is not to change the reflection, but to quiet the waters within me. The clearer the water, the clearer the truth. Sometimes when I meditate, I imagine myself as a pool of still water. Thoughts drift across the surface, memories, regrets, old wounds, and I let them pass. I don't chase them anymore. I don't drown in them. I just breathe and watch until the ripples fade. And in that stillness, I see it a faint, radiant image of who I really am beneath it all. Not the wound, not the anger, but the awareness holding it. That awareness, calm, deep, compassionate, is forgiveness itself. Now when I walk by the lake, I whisper to the water, "Teach me to remember, but not to hold." The surface shivers, reflects the light, and moves on, endlessly flowing, endlessly forgiving. And I think maybe that's all I've ever needed to learn, that water never clings to what it carries, and peace doesn't come from forgetting, but from reflecting long enough to finally let go. For a long time, I thought love was light, only light. Soft, radiant, flawless. The kind that fills the room and makes everything golden. I believed love was what healed, what made things beautiful, what made people whole. But love, I've learned, is not afraid of darkness. In truth, it needs it. I remember the night that changed my understanding of love forever. The power had gone out after a storm. The whole house was swallowed by blackness. I lit a single candle, and the tiny flame flickered to life. It wasn't perfect. It wavered, bent, trembled, but it was enough. The room didn't become bright. It became alive. The shadows moved, stretched, danced, and in that strange half-light, everything felt more real. That's when I understood love is not the absence of shadow. It's the dance between flame and darkness. It doesn't erase what hurts. It holds it. It doesn't demand perfection. It illuminates imperfection with tenderness. When love is real, it doesn't promise safety. It promises presence. It says, "Even here, even now, even when it's hard, I will stay." There was a time when I tried to love only what was easy, the laughter, the softness, the harmony. I avoided the silences, the misunderstandings, the heavy nights, but love that avoids shadow burns out fast. Because true love isn't fragile, it is fire. It transforms what it touches. Fire doesn't ask permission to change things. It consumes it, purifies it, reveals. It can destroy, yes, but it can also turn cold metal into glowing gold. That's what love does when it's honest. It doesn't leave you as it found you. I used to think falling in love was about finding someone who completed me. Now I see it's about finding someone who mirrors me, both the light and the dark. Love is a mirror made of flame. It shows you where you are soft and where you still burn. There's a kind of intimacy that only happens when two people dare to face each other's shadows without turning away. When you say, "I see this part of you," the fear, the flaw, the wound, and I'm not leaving. That's when love becomes sacred. It took me years to realize that love isn't meant to fix, it's meant to witness, to hold the trembling hand, to stand in the fire together until both hearts remember that light and darkness were never enemies. They were always two sides of the same flame. One evening, I sat beside someone I loved deeply. We weren't speaking. The silence between us was thick like smoke. We had hurt each other not out of malice, but out of our own unfinished fears. I wanted to fill the silence, to mend it with words, but then I looked at the candle on the table between us, burning steadily despite the drafts. And I thought maybe love isn't about always saying the right thing. Maybe it's about keeping the flame alive even when the air is cold. Love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just flickers, barely visible, but still there, waiting to be protected. Sometimes it's fragile, sometimes fierce, but always alive. I used to imagine love as a constant sunrise. Now I see it's more like firelight, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, sometimes only embers, but always capable of warmth if tended with care. The truth is, love demands presence more than perfection. It asks that you show up even when you don't know how to fix it, that you stay when things feel uncertain, that you listen when words fail. Love, like fire, lives on attention. Stop tending it and it cools. But give it breath, patience, honesty, compassion, and it glows again. There's a moment in every deep connection when the masks fall away. You stop trying to be beautiful and simply are. That's where love begins, not in the brightness of what we show, but in the shadows of what we hide. I've learned that love isn't blind. It sees everything, the wounds, the chaos, the unspoken truths, and chooses to stay anyway. That's its brilliance. Not that it avoids the dark, but that it shines through it. When I think of all the times love has burned me, I no longer wish them undone. Every scar has become a doorway to deeper compassion. Fire leaves marks, yes, but it also clears the forest for new growth. What looks like ruin is often the start of renewal. There was a woman I met once who lost everything in a house fire. When I asked her how she managed to rebuild, she said, "I didn't rebuild. I became the fire." Her eyes glowed when she said it, not with bitterness, but with a kind of serene strength. That's love's final transformation, when pain no longer destroys you, but refines you. Now, when I sit in the dark, I no longer fear the shadows. I light a candle and let the flame dance with them. I watch how they move together, not in war, but in rhythm. That's what love feels like now, not a battle, but a harmony between what hurts and what heals. The more I love, the more I understand that it's not about possession. It's about recognition, seeing the divine spark in another and realizing it's the same fire that burns within you. When love is pure, it doesn't consume, it illuminates. It turns the dark into depth, the fear into openness, the separation into belonging. And maybe that's all love really is, the courage to become the flame, to burn without fear, to shine without pride, and to warm even the darkest corners of another heart. Because in the end, love doesn't conquer darkness, it befriends it. And together, they dance flame and shadow, light and night, each making the other visible. There is a silence that comes after everything, after the questions, the storms, the prayers, and the tears. It doesn't announce itself. It simply appears like the moon rising over a sleeping sea. I used to think silence was empty, the space between things, between breaths, between moments, between meanings. But now I see it differently. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that no longer needs to be said. One night, I walked beneath the full moon. The world was silver quiet, vast awake. Every leaf, every stone, every breath shimmered with a stillness so alive I could feel the earth breathing with me. I stopped walking, and in that pause, I realized I had arrived. Not somewhere outside myself, but here, within the infinite quiet inside. The moon hung above me, round and soft, reflecting a light that wasn't its own. That's what we are, too, mirrors of something greater, shining not from possession, but from reflection. The moon does not strive to shine. It simply receives the light and gives it back. That is the secret of peace, the art of reflecting without holding, of existing without needing to prove. In that silence, I could feel every chapter I had lived breathing together, the river of letting go, the flowers of impermanence, the dawn of gratitude, the roots of compassion, the fire of wisdom, the wind of mindfulness, the water of forgiveness, and the flame of love, all returning to stillness, like rivers flowing home to the sea. I closed my eyes and the world disappeared, but the silence remained luminous, vast, gentle. There was no self to defend, no truth to prove, no story to finish. Only breath, only awareness, only space. Somewhere an owl called in the distance one soft, fleeting sound, then even that faded. The quiet that followed was not loneliness. It was fullness, rich with unseen life, heavy with unspoken knowing. In that fullness, I understood what the monks meant when they said, "The moon does not hurry, yet every shadow eventually yields." Silence doesn't ask you to leave the world. It invites you to see it as it is, to love it, without clinging to hear it, without needing to reply, to live it, without fear of ending. I sat upon a rock and watched the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. Each movement made the light tremble, yet the moon above remained whole. That's when I knew peace is not about still water. It's about remembering that what trembles below cannot disturb what shines above. All my life I had been searching for meaning, chasing truths like stars scattered across the sky. But now, beneath this moon, I saw that truth had never left me. It had always been here, between heartbeats, within the breath that connects all things, silence. I realized is the sound of truth, resting the voice of what no longer needs to convince you, the language of the soul, when it's finally done speaking. There are no more teachings to follow, no more steps to climb. Only this, the simple miracle of existing. To breathe beneath a moon that belongs to everyone. To feel space expanding within you until there is no line between you and the night. The mind wants to name it enlightenment, peace, nirvana. But silence needs no name. It simply is. I stayed there until dawn touched the edge of the sky. One by one, the stars disappeared, the air softened, and the moon slowly dimmed. Yet the silence remained glowing now from within me, as if I had swallowed the moon. When I finally stood to leave, the world felt lighter. The trees swayed, the wind moved, the birds began to sing again. Life had returned, but it no longer rushed. Everything was breathing. Everything was enough. And before I walked away, I whispered into the brightening sky, "Thank you for the silence that holds all sounds. Thank you for the space that holds all worlds. Thank you for the moon that shines without asking to be seen." Then I walked back into life, not apart from it, but as part of its quiet rhythm, carrying within me the same stillness the moon had taught me.